So, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for showing up this evening. I hope I'll make it worth your while. That's my aim. And I want to talk about free will. As Nick was saying, this is a very traditional philosophical problem. And I think actually in our thinking about free will, we are very often rather taken over by various thought, the philosophical gremlins. A book by Daniel Dennett called Elbow Room has the nice chapter title in it, Please Do Not Feed the Bugbears. And I think in a lot of our thinking about free will, we are rather haunted by bugbears and by worries that I don't think are actually anything like as well justified as people tend to suppose. So I'm going to talk about a kind of breezy approach to free will, if you like, studiedly breezy. And I'm going to take a bit of a high-handed attitude to a very bit of a high-handed approach to a very technical and extensive literature, because it does seem to me that a lot of the problems that are extensively and exhaustively and exhaustingly discussed in that literature are not problems that actually arise in quite the way they're supposed to, that we can live without getting answers to all of those problems. And actually, a lot of the problems can just be maneuvered around. And this paper is presents my ambition to maneuver around them. If you go online on academia.edu, for example, or on ResearchGate, you will find a paper by me called Free Will as an Acquirable Skill. And that was my first shot at this target. I've been thinking about this today, and I've actually written a 6-page paper today for Barnes, thinking about this subject afresh, because I didn't think that the paper I had before was saying quite what I wanted to say as clearly as I wanted to say it. So this is me trying again to get the subject straight and to say some things that I think are very obvious about free will, but which I hadn't yet succeeded in saying at all clearly. And if anyone would like a copy of this paper, well, I will be putting it up on academia.edu and on ResearchGate after tonight, probably in the light of your youthful, helpful, and no doubt critical feedback. Or if you want to ask me for a copy of the paper, you can email me. I've put my email on the paper there, at the head of the paper. Or if there's anything else you want to ask me about, by all means, email me. And if I can reply, then I will. So to work. Let's make a beginning. I want to start by saying that the problem of free will is child's play, and a baby can resolve it. And I mean what I say there in this sense. What you see in child's play is control. What any baby does is move from lack of control to control. This is how, this is a fact about child development. Babies start off by randomizing movements of their limbs, and they learn to control them over time, assuming that all is well with them, physically and mentally speaking. And I mean no offense. I recognize the existence of babies for whom this doesn't very unfortunately happen. But I'm talking about the typical case and the more standard case where nothing goes wrong in that kind of way, and where a baby moves from initially randomizing movements of her limbs to learning to control them. So a baby starts by doing anything at all with her limbs, and I remember watching this with our children. They start from doing anything at all, and they home in on the patterns of movement that get them the results that they want. So certain patterns of behavior are reinforced through the neural network. Other patterns are dropped because they turn out not to be productive. And that makes the baby capable of producing those patterns of movement that she wants to, when she wants to, and of not producing those patterns of movement when she doesn't want to produce them, or when she positively wants not to produce them. Now, a baby that is beginning to gain control in this sense is someone for whom child's play begins to be possible. And parents or other carers of the child encourage her to play with them, and that means to practice exercising her control. They say boo to her, and the baby learns to say boo back. And she learns to do it when they say boo to her and not at other times. So a stuffed giraffe is held out to her, one of my children still has a very well-known and well-loved and decidedly scruffy by now stuffed giraffe. And you hold out a stuffed giraffe to a baby, and the baby grabs it and puts it in her mouth and sucks on it a bit, maybe. And she learns to grab at a stuffed giraffe when it's there to grab, and not at other times. And she learns to wave it around, and maybe to, surprisingly quickly, a child will learn to get the stuffed giraffe to say boo to her parents and things like that. So she learns to act by being taught to interact, and that means by learning how to use her own dawning ability to control her own body, so as to make what she does with her body responsive to and coordinate with what other agents do with theirs. The child's play is an interesting place to start thinking about free will, because it's agency of a simple and original sort. It's where we all start as agents. Through play, babies learn to be agents. They have the experience of acquiring the particular skills involved in certain sorts of control. And the child, through learning that she can get things that she wants by learning to control her limbs, she may draw a more general lesson that all sorts of kinds of control are possible for her, in just the same way as the control involved in child's play, in saying boo back to someone who says boo to you. We can be agents in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of domains. As a child learns to walk, maybe to run, learns to talk, learns to play with other children, children learn that they can be agents in all sorts of ways. And learning to be an agent in any of these particular domains is acquiring the relevant skills of control. It's moving from randomizing, luck, flailing around, to skillful, non-random, and luck-proof mastery of the domain. To some degree, that is, of skillful, non-random, and luck-proof mastery of the domain. We never get total mastery, and that's a theme that I'm going to be saying a lot about in this talk. Free will doesn't have to be total to be real. It doesn't have to be absolute to be real. And I think here are some skills that people get at a slightly older age. So I'm not going to attempt to give you a demonstration of skiing in my living room, but think about learning to juggle. When you learn to juggle, and I have, let me lower the screen so you can see the juggling a bit better. When you learn to juggle, there's a trick that you can do, except I forgot how to do it. Never mind. Called the arch, where you send one of the balls over the top. And normally with juggling with 3 balls, you're doing 2 in that hand, 1 in this hand, and you send 1 up at a time. You go from 2 here to 2 there, and you go, it's a constant interchange between the 3 balls. And what you never do is what people who are trying to learn to juggle always do at first. They try and do an underpass like this. And no, it's not like that. 2 here, send 1 of them up. As that one comes down, send this one up. As that goes down, send this one up, and so on and so forth. So we can learn to juggle, and learning to juggle means, amongst other things, learning to do it and to do particular tricks in juggling, like I just failed to do, when you're meaning to do them, and not when you're trying to do, not when you're not trying to do them. So you get the ability to do these things, and part of the ability to do these things is the ability not to do them if you choose not to. So it's implicit within the skill of juggling is the ability to do otherwise. So that's what the skill means. And likewise with playing the piano. So this is catastrophic. If you take something like Barnes Prelude, and this is truly falls off this is okay. So and I need to press start to get the piano to work. So when you're playing the piano, I can play a Bach's First Prelude, more or less, if I play it slowly enough. Now, the ability to play the piano is the ability to do that and not to do other things that you might also do. So you have the ability to play the piano when you have the ability to when you have the ability to play Bach's for Chopin's First Prelude, Bach's First Prelude. I have the ability to play Bach's First Prelude at moderato as it's marked, as I've just been demonstrating. I can't play it. I can choose between playing it at moderato and playing it at allegro. People tend to play it much faster than I play it, but I like to play it slowly because I think it's a beautiful meditative piece. If I know how to play the piano, then I can choose between those two options. And that means that I play it at moderato, but I could play it at allegro and would have played it at allegro if I decided to. Or think about skiing. As I say, I won't give you an example of skiing in my own front room, but when I'm skiing, if I have control, that is to say, if I can ski, I make my next parallel turn right here on this mogul, a safe distance from the cliff on the edge of the piste, not there on that decidedly exposed mogul. But if I'd chosen to, then I would have turned there, not here. So let me say this again, because it's important, and let me say it again without visual distractions. When you're learning to juggle, or to play the piano, or to ski, to start with, you are indeed flailing around. You're not in control of what you're doing. If you even manage to be a spectacle, you'll be a comic one, and in the case of skiing, perhaps a dangerous one too. But as things progress, you will, all being well, exhibit more and more control, and control just is the ability to do otherwise. In juggling, it means that when I switch from standard 2-to-1 shuffles to do the arch, I switch but would not have switched if I hadn't decided to. In piano playing, it means that I take the first prelude at moderato, as it's marked, and not at allegro, but I would have taken it at allegro if I'd decided to. In skiing, control means that I make my next parallel turn here, but I could have made it there, and I would have made it there if I'd chosen to. Now, if you're a pianist, one thing you know about playing the piano is that the limits of your skill are the limits of the range of ways in which you can play, at choice, the pieces that you can play at all. So I might be able to play Bach's first prelude at allegro. I certainly couldn't play it at prestissimo. And every skier knows that there are limits to what turns it's possible for her to make without falling, and that on steep or icy terrain, these limits are the limits of what she can do without danger. If I'm skiing somewhere and I just about manage to turn in time to avoid dropping off the cliff edge next to the piste, or if I do somehow end up turning, even though it's only by lucky accident, then I shouldn't be skiing there. I can't ski safely there because I'm not fully in control. Things are not happening entirely because I want them to, and would not by any chance happen if I didn't want them to. In other words, again, I'm getting into situations where I lack the ability to do otherwise than I actually do. And when you're skiing, the situations like that, where you lack the ability to do otherwise than you actually do, are severely to be avoided because they're situations that can break your neck. So free will, when I say free will is an acquired or acquirable skill, what I mean is precisely that sort of control. As I'm proposing to use the phrase free will is a general term which covers all the kinds of agency that I've just been discussing, and indefinitely many other kinds as well. And free will, control in that sense, is something that we begin to learn when we're babies and can go on learning in this or that specific domain, like juggling or playing the piano or skiing, as life goes on. No doubt it's also something, control, is also something that we can and do lose sometime, when we're ill, for example, or asleep. And something that we'll all lose in the end, at the latest when we die, as sickness, old age, infirmity, debility of mind, and other nasty things begin to encroach upon our abilities to control our surroundings and to control our own bodies. So that is basically it. And that's what I mean by saying that free will is child's play, that a baby can solve the problem of free will. Because what I want to say about this kind of control is it is real. We have this kind of control. And by having that kind of control, we have free will. That's what free will is. So let me note some consequences of this very simple and I think very intuitive conception of free will. 6 consequences, and then I'll also talk about 2 objections, and that's basically it. That's basically the talk. So first, free will, as I propose to understand it, isn't something that in some abstruse metaphysical or theological sense we either have or don't have all along. Free will is something that a very small baby has in a small degree, and an able-bodied, intelligent adult has in a pretty high degree. So as that says, secondly, free will is something that comes in degrees. We aren't either free, full stop, or determined, full stop. Free will is never absolute. There are always some aspects of anything we do that we don't or can't control. For example, I am not at the moment attending to whether what I'm doing is well, I am attending to it now, but until I talked about it, I wasn't attending to whether it was making me hot. There's always some aspect of your performance. If you're skiing down the mountainside, you're probably not thinking about whether you're photobombing someone else. You're probably not thinking about whether you're making a particular kind of track in the snow. You're probably not thinking about whether you're causing the piste to be icier tomorrow. There are always some aspects of your performances that aren't in your the focus of your intentions. You don't control, and there are aspects too that you can't control. I can't control the calcification of my own bones whilst I'm skiing or playing the piano. It's just something that's going on as time goes on. But that's fine. We don't have to control every aspect of everything we do in order for there to be free will. We just need to be able to control some aspects of some of our performances. And in those respects that we do control them, our performances are free because, as I say, controlling a performance means that you do it and could not do it if you chose not to do it, means doing it and being able to do it some other way if you chose to do it some other way. These are the respects in which we have control of our performances, and they're also the respects in which those performances are free. So because there are all these indefinitely many ways of describing anything we do, there are all these different aspects of what we do, and in this aspect or that aspect, what I do can be free. Described one way, it can be free, and described another, it might not be free, because I'm not controlling it in that aspect. So one of the aspects in which our freedom comes in degrees, one of the things that we can control is how much we cultivate free will. We can choose to be more or less free. We can choose to be addicts or lazy couch potatoes, or to have thoroughly slack habits. We never get out of bed before midday. We spend our whole time stroking the Siamese. We never attempt to get a job. We're lazy couch potatoes. Without getting too moralistic about people's leisure time behavior, there's a sense in which choosing addiction or being a lazy couch potato is choosing to be less free, choosing to have a smaller scope to exercise your controlling. Whereas choosing to learn to ski or play the piano or drive or do philosophy, that's choosing, as a rule, to be more free, to have a kind of freedom that you didn't have before, because you have a kind of control that you didn't have before. You have a kind of skill that you didn't have before. So fourthly, free will is something that can be increased by cultivation, by learning new skills like the three described above, and can also be decreased by illness or addiction or compulsive behavior or depression or disabling injury or imprisonment or sheer laziness. And fifthly, since free will is not something that we either have full stop or lack full stop, though neither is free will some sort of metaphysical pixie dust attribute that we have in full and other animals lack completely. So I think the cases of non-human control, non-human agency are very interesting precisely because they illustrate just what you'd expect if free will is, as I'm wanting to say, something that emerges out of the order of nature. Then you would expect there to be non-human agents, and you would expect there to be animals, non-human animals, that illustrate control and that illustrate the ability to do otherwise. And as a matter of fact, there are plenty of examples of just this. There are plenty of non-human species that display skilled performances of various kinds and the ability to control their behavior in this or that aspect. So a chimpanzee, as you'll know, if like me you're an Attenborough fan, you'll know that chimps can use twigs to fish termites out of holes in the wood. And the chimp uses this twig, let's say, to fish out the termites from their burrow, and not that twig, because the chimp sees that this is a better twig to use, and the chimp, if it chose to use the other twig, would use the other twig, but it chooses to use this one. The chimp does what he does because he chooses to. If he could have chosen to use the other twig, if he had so chosen, he would have used the other twig. Or take another case, crows. The crow taps here on the tree bark because it's here that the crow has detected the presence of a juicy caterpillar that will scurry out of hiding if the crow taps. If the caterpillar had been detected elsewhere, then the crow, provided she's on good form today, she's behaving intelligently, if the caterpillar had been elsewhere, then the crow would have tapped elsewhere. Or suppose you have a dog, Bumble. Bumble knows perfectly well that when I say sit in that particularly commanding tone, then Bumble will get a treat if she sits. And if Bumble does sit, it will be because she's chosen to. And ample kind of statistical testimony to the possibility that she could have done otherwise is provided by all the other occasions on which she did do otherwise. Or take another case of non-human species that display skilled performances of various kinds. This is from fiction. In Tolkien's Middle-earth, he has a number of species: humans, hobbits, elves, dwarves, orcs are the main ones. There are also ents. I don't know what to say about ents. Tolkien says at one point in the Silmarillion, he doesn't say it in quite these words, that in his mythical world, humanity, man as Tolkien calls humanity, being a man of his time, he says man has free will, but the elves do not. Not quite in those words, but that seems to be what he means. And Tolkien probably thinks that hobbits have free will too, since his hobbits seem to be genealogically an offshoot of men. And he seems to think that dwarves and orcs don't have free will, since they have it in common that they're both species that were secretly created on the impulse of two of the archangel, the Valar, Aule and Melkor, respectively. But Tolkien never makes that clear, entirely clear, and we don't know what to say either about trolls and ents. Do they have free will in Tolkien's sense? I don't know. But in any case, I'm not sure what Tolkien means when he makes this distinction between having and lacking free will. It's very obvious from Tolkien's stories that his elves are agents who exercise skillful, agential self-control, deft and able control over their own performances. And in many, many cases, and in many, many ways, in fact, Tolkien's elves can do otherwise than they actually do, and they're clearly more skillful and self-controlled agents than Tolkien's men, or the real world's men, the real world's humans. So what can Tolkien have meant by saying that, unlike humans, the elves do not have free will? Perhaps he means that they're subject to fate, to the music of the Ainur, he calls it, in some ways that men are not. I'm sorry, I just realized a mistake. Aule and Melkor are not Valar, they're Ainur. Silly me. We'll correct that now. Right, to proceed. So Tolkien does seem to have this all or nothing conception of free will, which is why I'm going on about Tolkien, because I think it's a mistaken conception of free will to think that free will is something mysterious over and above the ability to control what we do. My response to that is, and this is me in demystifying mode, in brisk and perhaps brusque and breezy mode, saying actually free will is just about this ability to control what we do and to do otherwise, for it to be true that we would have done otherwise in slightly different circumstances, we would have chosen otherwise, and if we had wanted to, we could have done otherwise. That's what control is, and that's all there is to free will. That's my point. It's not something, some kind of metaphysical pixie dust, as I put it. It's not something magic in the background. And so I don't actually find fully intelligible Tolkien's claim that the elves do not have free will, given what supremely skillful and self-controlled agents the elves typically are. It certainly doesn't mean they're not having free will, certainly doesn't mean what Augustine in The City of God says about the angels who didn't fall, that they have reached a state in God's kingdom where it's no longer possible for them to sin. At one time it clearly was, because some of the angels did, but the angels don't have free will in the sense that they can't sin, non posse peccare, they can't go wrong. But the elves are not like that, because some of the elves very clearly do go wrong. Fëanor is the obvious example. He rebels against the Ainur. So fatalism in philosophy seems perhaps to be what Tolkien has in mind, but what does fatalism mean? Fatalism, let's have a quick word about that. In philosophy, there is a specific use for the word fatalism, so there's a distinction you get in a lot of the literature, the vast and discouragingly complicated literature about free will and determinism talks about fatalism sometimes, and it tends to be an argument of this form, an argument a bit like what we'll discuss a bit later as the consequence argument. The argument goes something like this. There were in the past facts about the present. It was in 1066 AD already true. It was true then, that on the 14th of March 2023, I would be giving this paper. Now, of course, you can't alter the past, and there's this fact about what was true in 1066. It was then true that I was then going to be giving this paper tonight. So there's that fact in the past, that fact about the present in the past, and the past, as we know, is immutable. So if there's this past which I can't change, this past fact that I can't change, then the present must be immutable. And so it can't be otherwise than that I now give this talk. And this talk, this form of fatalism is sometimes called logical fatalism, and it's presented in just that form. There's an early version of that argument in Aristotle, in what he calls the sea battle argument. And you get something like that in a slightly different mode, theological fatalism rather than logical fatalism or logical determinism, where people talk about what God knows. And they say, God has always known that Sophie-Grace would give this talk tonight. God's always known it. You can't alter the past. So therefore, it's always been the case that I was going to do this. And therefore, I can't, since I can't alter the past, I can't alter the present. Now, all of this seems to me just like an elegant piece of logical trickery. And it seems also to be a confusion of causation and implication. The argument makes it sound as if facts about the present in the past make the present what it has to be and prevent it from being anything else. That seems to me the wrong way round. If God knew in 1066 AD that I was going to give this talk tonight, if God knew that in 1066, then the reason why God knew that is because I was going to give this talk. And the reason why I was going to give this talk is because I am in fact giving this talk. So it looks as if there might be some facts about the present which can alter the past. So anyway, that's fatalism in philosophy, but fatalism in popular culture, and perhaps in Tolkien, I'm not sure, means something quite different. It means there are some destinations that are fixed, and whatever else changes, and all sorts of things can change, then you're still going to end up at those destinations. So think of prophecies like the famous one in Herodotus: if you go to war against Persia, then you will destroy a great empire. The Delphic Oracle says to the king of Lydia, and Croesus, the king of Lydia, does go to war against Persia and does destroy a great empire. And of course, you guessed the punchline, the great empire that he destroys is his own, the Lydian Empire. So those destinations will still be arrived at no matter what we do, but there are famous cases where people run away because they see a fate coming their way. So this happened in the story of Oedipus. I talk about this in a paper on Oedipus called The Riddle of Oedipus, which is also online. His father, Laius, tries to get rid of the threat to his throne by having Oedipus exposed. He doesn't do the job properly and have him thoroughly killed. But because of the prophecy that Oedipus, the infant Oedipus, one day will marry his mother and slay his father, Laius, his father, tries to get rid of him. And of course, as we know from reading the Oedipus Rex, Oedipus nonetheless fulfills the prophecies that are made of him. One way or another, you'll get to the destination. Somerset Maugham's story, Appointment in Samara, is about fatalism in that sense too. So someone encounters someone in the marketplace, encounters death in the marketplace in Damascus, and they're so horrified by this that they mount a horse and ride all night and get to Samara the next day. And there, of course, they meet Death, and they say, Death says, well, I'm surprised to see you here. I mean, I knew you had an appointment with me here today, but I was astonished that you were in Damascus yesterday. So the grisly story is that you run to your own fate by trying to run away from it. But there seems to be nothing incompatible with free will about this conception of fatalism. You can, after all, choose what you're going to do about the prophecy that's threatening you. You can choose how to react. So in Somerset Maugham's story, the poor man who ends up dead didn't have to get on his horse and ride away. And if he hadn't done, well, he would still have ended up in Samara somehow, I suppose. Maybe a giant bird would have picked him up and carried him there. But he did seem to have choices about what to do about this prophecy. So fatalism in this sense, I don't think has very much to do with determinism. I've discussed it because it's fun, but let's go back to talking about free will. Different conceptions of free will are sometimes contrasted according to whether they involve the ability to do or to choose otherwise. And that contrast derives from philosophical confidence that we can give a clear picture of a deterministic world, that is to say, a world in which necessarily nothing at all can ever happen otherwise than it actually does happen. In a world like that, philosophers say, we can only still have moral responsibility if our agency can be detached from the ability to do otherwise. And so many philosophers have argued that moral responsibility doesn't depend on the ability to do otherwise. Harry Frankfurt argues that. Such philosophers call themselves compatibilists because they think moral responsibility is compatible with determinism, the thesis that everything happens just as it must and can't happen any other way. Now, these people, the compatibilists, as I say, they think that there can be moral responsibility even though we can't do otherwise, and that is their compatibilism. Now, that seems to me to be a misunderstanding of agency, because when we act, we control what we're doing, and controlling what we're doing precisely means that we do it this way, and we could have chosen not to do it at all, or to do it some other way. Control just is the ability to make things happen this way because I choose this way, or that way because I choose that way, or not at all because I choose that way. Consider again the juggling balls, or where I make my ski toe, or what tempo I play Bach's first prelude at. If it's not true that I couldn't have done these things otherwise if I'd chosen to, then it's not true that my doing of them is skillful performance, which exhibits control. But if my doing of them is not skillful performance, which exhibits control, then my doing of them is not even agency. If agency is the thing for which we're morally responsible, then the very concept of agency already entails control, and so entails also the ability to do otherwise. So Yabu for compatibilism. Now, if you say things like that, then you will get questions like these. Haven't I just committed myself to contra-causal freedom, as people rather polemically call it? Have I committed myself to the existence of gaps in the causal order? Am I being, horror of horrors, unscientific? Have I committed myself to indeterminism? Well, 4 questions there, and my answers are going to be no, maybe, no, and yes. I'll start with the third, the accusation of an unscientific worldview, and I reject that. My answer to that is no. I can't see anything unscientific about claiming that there are in the world cases of control in the sense that I've been describing. On the contrary, science itself is, in large part, about studying exactly cases of control just like that. Scientists study the intelligent behavior of chimpanzees, and they study it as intelligent behavior, as control, as agency. And they study the intelligent behavior of crows and corvidae. They study the intelligent behavior of dogs. They even study the intelligent behavior, of human beings. And to study that is to study the control that's involved there. And there's a further point too, about doing science itself. Science itself, the practice of science itself, is control. It involves control. The scientists do this experiment and not that one, because this is the revealing experiment to do. But if that had been the experiment that they thought was revealing, they would have done that one. So working scientists themselves exercise control in the sense of availing themselves of their own ability to do otherwise in choosing how to do their science. So for them to deny that there's such a thing as that ability would be a kind of, it would have something self-refuting about it or self-defeating. It would be a kind of performative contradiction. That an ability like that is real and frequently realized in the real world is not only presupposed by the practice of science, they go out looking, for example, for control in that sense, it's also exemplified by it. What about contra-causal freedom? Well, the phrase is rhetorical and I resist the rhetoric. I'm not saying that things happen in defiance of causality. I'm saying rather that we need a better account of causality. If our account says that nothing can happen otherwise than it does happen, then that's just not a very good account of causality, because cases of things being able to happen otherwise than they actually do are all over the place, and control is a clear instance, though it's not the only one. So a good scientific account of the causal order of the world had better be able to make sense of the facts about control that I've already alluded to. Am I saying that the causal order has gaps in it? This was the question to which my answer is maybe. I'm not sure. It depends what you mean by a gap. It also depends what you mean by a causal order. If what's meant is that the causal order is supposed to be what people sometimes call the deterministic chain, necessary links between everything that happened and everything that next happens, well, in the first place, I don't think there is any one single causal order in that sense. There are lots and lots of causal orders, and which of them we look at depends on our explanatory interest at that point. Maybe we're doing field zoology, maybe we're doing field anthropology, maybe we're doing chemistry, maybe we're doing physics or biology. The idea that all of these causal orders are a single causal order just seems to me to be an unwarranted assumption. But even if they were a single causal order, that wouldn't yet show that that causal order was necessary or could not be otherwise than as it is, because this is the question to which I answered yes, there is at least some indeterminism in the world, in the following sense. There are causes that have disjunctive effects. So it's not A causes B, it's A causes B or C. And in advance of rolling the die or playing the lottery, you can't tell which it's going to be. And there is no fact of the matter about which it's going to be. It's not just that there's something there that you don't know. It is that there's no fact of the matter. So think about dice. When you roll a fair die, you're setting in motion a cause with disjunctive effect. That's the whole point of a fair die. The rolling of the die will cause one of 6 outcomes, since die are normally, except in Dungeons and Dragons, they're normally cubes, and so they have 6 faces. Dice don't usually stand on one of their vertices or rest on one of their corners, one of their sides. The rolling of the die will typically cause one of 6 outcomes, and it's indeterminate which of those 6 outcomes it will cause. And if it's not indeterminate, then it isn't a fair die. That's the whole point of a fair die. And I think there's good reason to think that there are lots of natural processes which are like that because they're probabilistic. Hence, from all this, it follows that indeterminism is part of our scientific picture of reality. And the idea, the old bugbear of a total determinism, a total necessitation of every state of the universe by every past state of the universe, that's simply a mistaken picture of how things are. There's looseness in the fabric of the world. Causation is, in general, not a straitjacket that we're trapped in. It's more like a river that we can learn to swim in and to use for our own purposes and indeed amusement. And I want to make you think about that metaphor of a river. The causal processes of the world are going somewhere. There is such a thing as entropy, for example. We're all subject to gravity. We're all subject to various forms of physical law, just as you would be if you were swimming in a river. But if you're in a river, then there are different possibilities. One is that you just drift helplessly along with the river carrying you down to the sea. Another is that you become capable of swimming, or perhaps even you make a boat to use on the river. And then, although the currents of the river are still there, nothing you have done has been contra-causal in the sense of defeating the currents in the river. Nothing you have done has stopped the current from flowing, but you have found a way of organizing things. You have found a form of organization such that you are in a different relationship to the river. And I think our relation to the world in general is like that. There are causal flows, there are things going on, but we can organize ourselves in such ways that we stand in a more interesting relation to those causal flows than simple helplessness. Okay, let's talk about responsibility and praise and blame. I'm saying that free will is an acquirable skill, and I'm focusing your attention, I hope, on those cases where various kinds of control are acquired by agents, who can then be praised or blamed for good or bad exercises of that control. But here's an old objection. It's at least as old as the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, which was written in about 340 BC. There are some people who just don't have the constitution ever to display any control over anything, and how much your constitution allows you to acquire free will is not up to you. If you're a couch potato by nature, that's just bad luck. If you're an energetic person, an activist, who naturally sets about acquiring acquirable skills of the kind that I'm saying deserve the name of free will because they're cases of control, if that's your constitution, you're an activist, not a couch potato, that's just your good luck. I call this the couch potato objection. Now, I think there are indeed some natural couch potatoes. There are indeed different degrees of natural predisposition to be the kind of person who will make an effort to acquire control. And that to some extent, these things are indeed a matter of bald constitutive luck. But note the words "to some extent." All along, I've been saying that free will, the ability to exercise agential self-control, is a matter of degree. So no need at all to deny that some agents extensively lack it, just as other agents extensively possess it. The whole point is that there's no absolute contrast between those who have free will and those who don't have free will. Free will as agential self-control is always an imperfect possession. No one, in truth, has or conceivably could have complete and total agential self-control. But nothing as grandiose as complete and total agential self-control is needed for there to be free agents who act in ways for which they're responsible. All that's needed is that some agents should have acquired some agential self-control in some domains to some degree. And that this need is satisfied in ordinary life is completely obvious. People learn to ski. People learn to play the piano. People learn to juggle. People learn to do philosophy. Babies learn to play and to talk and to walk. It's a matter of straightforward social and interpersonal observation that hardly any of us lacks that much, and many of us have a lot more than that. So the upshot of the argument I'm wanting to say is one that chimes very well with our actual moral experience about praising and blaming others. There are cases where we praise and cases where we blame, and there are cases where it seems a kind of mistake to do either, because someone just lacks the capacities to make either appropriate. You have control and you exercise it well, so you deserve praise. You can play the piano, and you do play the piano, and you play something beautiful, and that deserves praise. Or you have control and you exercise it badly, so you can play the piano, and when you're the school organist, let's say, and the headmaster comes out on stage, and instead of playing a fanfare, you play Colonel Bogey, which is very naughty of you, and you deserve blame for doing that. But there's also the case where you lack control, so naturally you don't exercise control at all because you can't, and in that case you deserve neither praise nor blame, unless you deserve blame for failing to develop control where you could have. As a matter of straightforward moral experience, we meet all three of those kinds of cases, and to attempt to reduce the kinds to fewer than these three, I think, is just untrue to our experience. So yes, certainly, the answer to the couch potato objection in short is yes, certainly there are couch potatoes, but I never said there couldn't be. All I said was that some people do better than that, and that, well, in fact, all people do better than that in some ways, and it's where they do better than being mere couch potatoes that we get to praise or blame them. Here's another objection, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, and if you don't mind, this will take me about 3 minutes, so I will just run through this if that's okay. So someone will say, this is a bit like the consequence argument that we encountered before, how you perceive the goods and bads, how you set up and frame the situation in which you act, what dispositions you have to respond to the situations so perceived and framed, all of this is determined by factors in your past that you can't now control. So you aren't praised or blamed for acting as you now do. The dice were rolled and all that long before you acted. The situation's been set up. You can't help but have the following moral view, let's say, because of your conditioning. You can't help but think this is the thing to do here because of the constitution you have, which was caused by your past, and you're not in control of the past, so you're not in control of the person who you now are. Well, very quickly to deal with this, I suggest we just go back to our analogies. Think about piano playing, think about skiing, thinking about juggling. When you exhibit control in piano playing or skiing or whatever, of course your past training and predisposition are relevant to how well you now perform. Certainly a case where only that past of predispositions is decisive for our control here and now. Certainly a case like that is possible, but it's not the usual case, and it's not a good case. A cricket batter might be so traumatized by facing past seam bowling that he can't now see properly, in cricketing terms, what's going on in front of him. He doesn't see a loose delivery that could easily be hooked by before. He only sees a threat to the bridge of his nose. And apparently Something like this happened to Stuart Broad. He got hit when he was batting, and he became quite traumatized at the crease. And his batting went right off because he was afraid. He was just thinking about the past. But there are good cases, and Stuart Broad, bless him, I think has got it back to some extent now. In a good case, an entirely usual sort, the agent's awareness as he acts is not only controlled by the past, whether or not traumatic. The agent acts in response to, and as trained by, a number of things, and one of the central things he reacts to is just the reality in front of him right now. So his training is that part of him enables him to do just this. He's trained himself to track the reality in front of him, the fast approaching cricket ball, where the fields are standing, and he's trained himself to respond in real time to that. So this training in responsiveness to reality can also be this past training in responsiveness to present reality can be part of the past that's relevant to what he does now. But the most important thing that's relevant to what he does now is that he's tracking what's going on right now. And I want to say that agency, a lot of the time, can be like that. It's true that it matters how we are predisposed to react right now. It's true that that matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. What also matters is what we're aware of right now and the reality that we're tracking right now. And if you're just caught in your past predispositions, then you don't really have control at all. To suppose that someone has control is to suppose that as they're playing the Bach, they can think about how they're playing it and respond and adjust in real time to what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, and bring out a performance which is genuinely controlled, because here and now it is possible for them to do otherwise than they actually do if they choose to. That's me 5 minutes over time. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sophie-Grace. I'm hoping you can now hear me, which means yes. I can't hear you. Fantastic talk, and a very wide range of topics and objections covered there. I'm going to first of all see if there are some questions in the room. If you have a question already, please put your hand up. We've got one or two. Okay, we've got one here and one there, and then we'll go to the room in a second. I just want to also say, if you're on Zoom, please put your hand up on Zoom, which is it's a little bit confusing, like most of Zoom. You can go to the is it the reactions bit, and then you can put your hand up there, I think, at the bottom. So, it's got a real hand. Yeah. Thank you, Robin. Okay, and you can also type questions in the chat, and we'll do it. Yeah, Susan managed to get her hand up. Fantastic. I did. So that's working. So do that if you'd like to ask a question over Zoom, and we'll come to you in a minute. Let's take two questions in the room, and just remember we'll have to do a proper switch over to the sound, so we can't do much back and forth clarification. So make your questions
they're going to have my question.
As you can. I think we have one here.
No, they're going to have my question.
Hi. As I understand it,
speak right into the microphone.
As I understand it, is that better? As I understand it, you're saying that in order to exercise,
no, we can't hear you.
In order to exercise free will, can you hear me now? In order to speak, anyway, yes. You're saying, I think, that the conditions to exercise free will is that you have to have an acquirable skill, and you have to exercise a choice. If that's correct, then how low down the, as it were, the food chain do you go? I mean, to take an extreme example, COVID-19 has an acquirable skill, but I think fairly clearly not a choice, not making a choice when it mutates to infect and vaccinate individual. But you're implying, I think, that certainly a monkey does and a crow does. But how far down can you reasonably go? And does it imply a conscious choice or just a choice, if indeed that distinction has any meaning at all?
So I think we got all of that. Well done. So with these microphones, you have to talk right into them for Sophie-Grace to be able to hear you. But I think you got most of that, Sophie-Grace. So how far down the the food chain or the evolutionary chain, does one go and still find beings able to exercise free will of one sort or another? Over to you, Sophie-Grace.
I think that's an empirical question, and if I may say so, I think one of the selling points of my approach to free will is that it makes a lot of questions tractable, empirical questions that we can resolve by looking for evidence, where on other approaches perhaps things are a bit more abstruse and a bit more up in the air, and it's not clear what would count as resolving whether agents have control. So how far down the food chain or the evolutionary ladder do I want to go? I don't know. I think that's a question for scientists. I think what is certainly going to be true is that as we get to simpler and simpler cases, we're going to be less inclined to talk about agency, because agency, as we know it, certainly has a number of marks, and control is only one of them. I suppose that's true. So, for example, conscious control is probably how we think about agential control. We might think that, for example, a bumblebee, which certainly reacts to stimuli in a controlled way. For example, it's my experience that if you try and photograph a bumblebee, they're instantly aware that you're there, and they instantly make it very difficult for you to photograph them. They instantly dodge behind a leaf, which is very annoying of bumblebees, because I like bumblebees and get pictures. But most of the marks of agency that we typically think of probably aren't there with bumblebees. For example, I would not be surprised to learn that bumblebees don't have memories in the way that we do, don't have self-awareness in the way that we do, and so on and so forth. So control all on its own isn't going to get us agency as we think of it in typical human beings. But I'm not at all alarmed by the thought that actually something like free will agency, free agency, controlled agency might go further in the animal kingdom than consciousness and awareness does. That doesn't abash me at all. I mean, maybe we can even say that, viruses which respond differentially to different environmental stimuli, maybe they can be modeled as having control. But that's the other thing I want to say. Scientists sometimes duck out of these heavy metaphysical questions by talking about how things can be modeled. And then there's a big question about how realistic the model is. I mean, suppose scientists say, well, human beings can be modeled as autonomous individuals, self-conscious agents who respond in feedback ways to their environment. They display this counterfactual control. So if it goes this way, then they do that. But if it had gone that way, then they would have done the other, which I think is the essence of control. So the scientists say, you can model humans like this. And we philosophers, of course, say, well, come on, spit it out. You say we can be modeled that way. Are we really that way or not? And the scientists shrug their shoulders and say, that's not my concern. That's not my problem. That's yours. So I don't think scientists always need to be that agnostic. I think there are clear cases where scientists should come off the fence and say, yes, this is happening through mental causation, as philosophers call it. This is happening because the agent has a belief. So the lion is stalking that thorn bush because the lion believes that there's a gazelle hidden in it, and the lion happens to be correct about this. Now, I don't think it's useful in this case to remain agnostic and say the lion doesn't really have any beliefs, it's just behaving like it has beliefs. I think we should spit it out and say the lion has beliefs. But this is going to be a detailed matter of examining particular empirical data, and hooray for that. I'd much rather examine empirical data than be stuck in an abstruse argument about the nature of necessity and the logic of the counterfactual. Perhaps that just shows that I'm not a proper philosopher, but there you are. I like empiricals.
Thank you very much, Sophie-Grace. I think we have one more, we've got two more questions in the middle, so maybe we'll take both of those together and then hand back to Sophie-Grace. So Brian, you can choose whichever one you want first.
Thanks very much. Very, very interesting ideas. It sounds like you're saying the following, that before you learn to juggle, I can predict exactly what's going to happen when you try. You're going to drop all the balls on the floor. After you've learned to juggle, I can't predict what you're going to do. You might do an ordinary juggle, you might throw them away, you might do one of those tricks you're talking about. And it's the fact that I can't predict it that means you have free will. You also use the word choice. That seems like just pushing the definition onto another word. So let's forget about that. But the point is, there might be two people. I can't predict what you're going to do, but someone else can, because they know you can only juggle for 10 seconds before you drop them. A hypothetical being who knows the position of every atom in your body and its velocity can predict exactly what you're going to do for the next year. So for me to say you have free will, perhaps says more about me than it says about you.
Should we take the other questions on next to you, and then Sophie-Grace, you can come back on both of those.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the sort of perspective of the thing I find almost, sorry, I'm audible.
Oh yes, you speak right into the microphone.
Right there. Excellent. I enjoyed the perspective as a sort of masterable technique of free will. Oh, that's it, it's the angle. Oh, that's it. The idea of free will being a masterable technique, but why do you want to juggle? Why do you want to play the piano? Why did you want to read Tolkien? I mean, there are people who read Tolkien, right? Don't read it, don't like it, but why did you want to do that in the first place? Where do you situate free will there? Can you explain why you did or did not want to master this technique to begin with? I see the agency in mastering the action, but where did that action come from? And maybe there is no explanation to that, but where's the free will there? Somebody doesn't want to juggle. They might want to be independent. They might want to be a couch potato. Even I find that right. But where is free will there? I'm like, are you stopping short of kind of the root of this?
Thank you. So I think you heard most of those, Sophie-Grace. So I think the first one was really, perhaps this applies very well to your example of the toss of the coin or the roll of the dice. If we had perfect information, complete information about all the atoms involved in the states and the motions or the subatomic particles or whatever it is, we would be able to predict perfectly what was going to happen. So there isn't actually any could have been otherwise, sort of classic scientific determinism arguments. And then the second point was, yes, you could have done otherwise, but you happen to have this particular desire. So where does that come from? And surely we're not responsible for that. Tracking it back one step, we're just, in the grip of our wants, aren't we? And so actually there's no place for freedom to get started. So over to you on those two.
Okay, so let me take this in turn. On the point about prediction, I don't want to say that if you're free, then people won't be able to predict what you will do. I want to say that if you're free, then people's predictions about what you're going to do will be different from what they would be otherwise. Because if you become a skilled pianist, then in some ways your performance will become more predictable, not less. Because when I attempt to play Bach, all sorts of stuff can happen because I'm not a very good pianist. When Lang Lang plays Bach, all sorts of stuff does happen, but it's different kinds of stuff. And one thing you can be pretty confident of is that Lang Lang is not going to fluff the difficult bit at the end of the first prelude. The arpeggio that goes up the scale, boom, 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 boom. Lang Lang is not going to fluff that. With me, it's about 50-50 whether I'll fluff it. So I don't want to make a general connection between free will and unpredictability. Rather, I want to make a general connection between free will and being predictable according to higher orders. If you want to use the metaphor of higher and lower, according to higher orders of prediction, because your actions will accord with a craft or a skill that you have come to possess, and therefore your actions will take a different shape and a different form. And in many ways, as I said before, they'll be more predictable, not less predictable. Unpredictability is the mark of the indeterminate, not of the skillful. And of course, on top of that, I also want to add that to really good performances, there will perhaps be a different kind of unpredictability coming in. So suppose Lang Lang is playing the Bach and he puts in a way of interpreting bars 17 to 21 that just never occurred to me. I never thought of that before. But this unpredictability comes within the context of a new and special kind of predictability, the predictability that we're going to get through the performance. Think of Shakespeare performances too. Ian McKellen is playing, let's say, the Fool in King Lear. And Ian McKellen does the Fool in a way that had never occurred to me before and that I find revelatory. But it's revelatory of what is there in the script of King Lear. It's just I hadn't seen it before. And now it makes sense in a way it never did before. Is that predictability or unpredictability? Well, it's a bit of both. But the point is we've been taken to a higher level of interpretation from the random level that we started at. So that brings us on to the other point, the other question about knowing the future, knowing the future position of all the atoms. Sorry, no, the other question was different, wasn't it? The other question was about where does your desire to do things come from? Well, they come from the desires that infants have. But one desire that infants have, and I think have very clearly, is to be people. They want to be agents. They want to be independent, autonomous beings in the world. So they have, from the get-go, I would say, a certain kind of second order desire. And their second order desire is to be capable of forming their own desires. They want to be creatures that can go out there and choose what to do with their lives. They want to be autonomous. And this is very important to children. It's very important to all of us. They want not only to be able to do stuff, but to choose what stuff they're going to be able to do. So when you ask, why does someone want to learn to juggle? Well, one reason in a small child that may be very obvious is because a small child wants to be someone who can do stuff that they couldn't do before, and wants to be able to do stuff that other people can't do. That's often very important to children too. With adults, it might be, why does an adult want to learn to juggle? Well, I wanted to learn to juggle actually to entertain children. That was why I wanted to learn to juggle. And also because I had friends who could juggle and I wanted to do what they were doing. So at that meta level, I think what you find is very often various sorts of primal wish, like to fit in with others, or to give others pleasure, or to give myself pleasure. All of those things are in the mix. But there's also this second order desire to be someone who can control what they control, who can make decisions about what to make decisions about. I think we do have that kind of desire, and I think it's important to us, and I think it's a key part of our autonomy. So I think you can, as I say, I want an emergent view of free will. I want free will to emerge naturally from the rest of nature. I don't want it to be something, there isn't a saltation around free will, as far as I'm concerned. Free will emerges smoothly and naturally from other stuff in nature, and that's fine by me. And if you can see even viruses as doing stuff that is responsive to their environment, such that had circumstances been otherwise, then they would have done otherwise, that's fine by me. That's not a problem at all. It's exactly what I predict if free will is emergent. And likewise here, I think free will can happily be emergent from other and perhaps more simple and animal desires that human beings have. And that's fine by me too. It's continuity all the way down and all the way up.
Thank you very much, Sophie-Grace. I'm just looking in the room to see if we have any more questions ready. I think we might attempt, bear with us, to go over to Zoom. And so we'll ask Susan to unmute herself. I put you back on mute for a second. So unmute.
Hello.
We will pass over to you to ask your question now.
Really great speech. Loved it. Really, really interesting. I do have a few thoughts here. I mean, it does seem to me that you have possibly reverted to the God as the immutable kind of understanding, that we don't know who the God is, but we can kind of refer to this thing. That's one thing. and you haven't really explained that. You know, you've actually said God in a very, you know, a great way, but not all of us would agree with that because some of us are atheists, so we don't have that feeling or opinion. The other thing you did say about free will, you mentioned in the very first part of number 4, you said sometimes there is also sheer laziness, and you sort of semi-connected that to people who are imprisoned or in some way unable to express their free will. And I just wonder what you meant by that, because I'd like that to be a little bit expanded, if that's okay.
Should I respond, Nick? Okay, yes. Thank you, Susan. First on God. I only mentioned God in my talk when I was talking about fatalism. And in talking about fatalism, I was talking about something that I regard as a distraction from the key issues about free will. So, although as it happens, I am a theist, I don't think there's any necessity at all to bring God into the picture in order to make sense of free will. I think you make sense of free will by understanding agency and control is the ability to do otherwise. And that's it. That is my view of free will. So I didn't think God was in the picture, necessarily in the picture at all here. And I thought what I was saying was absolutely neutral between theists and atheists. So I don't see why anything I've said here has committed me one way or the other on the issue of God's existence. On the second point, I noticed when I was writing my paper that there were quite a lot of points where I was in danger of saying something potentially offensive, and this is one of them. There are people who are, I do think there are people who are just plain lazy, and I base that belief on self-observation because sometimes I am just plain lazy, and I think observation of other people too suggests that sometimes they too are just plain lazy. I want to distinguish those cases very clearly. To avoid offense, I want to make it perfectly clear that I do not think that laziness in that sense, in the sense in which laziness is a vice, a defect of character, it's not the same thing at all as, for example, having ME or being chronically depressed or having various sorts of disabling condition, which are actually medical conditions and which people most certainly do have. I'm not not for a moment wanting to run those two together. I think laziness as a phenomenon is simply the state you're in when you know that you could respond to something good and worthwhile, and you just can't be asked. Laziness is not being askedness, and we're all prone to that from time to time. And of course, it may depend on objective physiological factors, or it may just be a weakness of character. I think it's telling that we can train ourselves out of laziness to some extent in a way that we can't train ourselves out of ME. Pull yourself together, my father's favorite set of words, has real application when we're talking about laziness. Sometimes you do need to pull yourself together, but it has no application at all when we're talking about people who are clinically depressed or something like that. So I think it's important to be careful in distinguishing the cases, not so much because I don't want to give offense, as because I don't want to say things that reasonably give offense. It's not just that I don't want people to be upset. It's more that I don't want people reason to be upset.
No, absolutely. Agree with you. I was just talking about those who are incarcerated, who may not be able to access those abilities to actually self-motivate. That's the point I was making.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's an important set of other cases. When I talked about incarceration, I was thinking, I was kind of half alluding to Hume's and Locke's famous remarks about people who are in prison. Hume says that if someone's in prison, then you can say he's free if he doesn't go beyond the borders of his cell, but that's a bit of a mockery. And Locke says something similar. I had that in mind. So people who are incarcerated, I mean, one of the reasons why banging so many people up for so long is a very bad and destructive thing to do, that we do in this country, in the UK. It's a very bad and destructive thing to do because it breeds habits of helplessness and the inability to, it makes your mojo collapse. It makes your ability to get stuff done collapse because you're constantly, you are institutionalized, as they say. You constantly have no options. There's just no scope for you to have initiative in the way that a normal unimprisoned person does. And however badly you may have offended against the law, this is quite a destructive way to treat people. But incarceration is a quite different case from cases of illness. I didn't mean to suggest it was the same sort of case at all. It's very different, but it is also a case where you have so much less that you can control, and you're less free in that sense, that there's very little you can control when you're locked up in a prison cell compared to can control. I mean, I suppose I do occasionally have I do occasionally have prison nightmares, and the essence of a prison's nightmare is, if I was in prison, then I couldn't just go for a walk today. I've stopped.
Seamless. I don't think anyone noticed me switching the sound back at the end. Apologies for that. We got pretty much all of it. We're coming to the end. We've got time for maybe one or two quick questions, which I'm happy to ask. We have one here, and then I'll ask one, and then we'll pass back to Sophie-Grace. This is the same question.
Hello, am I audible?
Just about. Really go for it like this.
I can barely hear me. I'll do my best to speak very low. A lot of what you are saying about free will reminds me of how we teach people to engage creativity in their life, not just in writing and art, but in how you make decisions about your life. And it seems to me that this is a parallel for you. This is something that we can engage with, maybe by removing the obstacles, just as if you remove the obstacles to creativity, it comes more naturally, you do more of it. Any practical tips on that and how you engage with that more in your life?
So we'll leave you to think about that for a second, and I will add to that. Sophie-Grace, looking at sort of going back to the whole, classical scientific determinism argument, you've talked a bit about how free will lies in competence and the possibility of choosing otherwise. So I'm interested in just sort of teasing that apart slightly. If I were to build a decision-making machine that had access to lots of information and could pick at random any one of 5 options that met its criteria for being a relatively accurate answer, then we might have a competent machine that had access to the right information to give any one of a variety of accurate answers and could have given another answer while meeting its criteria, but it would still just be a computer program. Is there an important way in which we are different from that, or your definition picks out, or is there no important difference? But does your definition not pick it out? So over to you to think about those two.
Okay, thank you for both those extremely interesting questions. On the first question, I think I'll just say this. One thing that small children find a very encouraging experience, we all do actually, is the experience of discovering that they're able to do something. And something they didn't think they could do, they succeed in doing. And that gives them a very general kind of boost in self-belief, because they come to think that if they can do that, if they suddenly discover that they can juggle, then they think, well, maybe there's all sorts of things that I can't currently do that I could learn to do. And if you'll excuse a quick advert for the Open University, one of the great joys of teaching for the Open University is seeing people who, for whatever vicissitudes they've been through in life, they have the belief that they're not actually much good and they can't do anything. And then they do a degree with the OU and they come out absolutely glowing. absolutely buzzing because they think, here is something significant that I can do, and lo and behold, I have done it. And they're so proud of what they've achieved, and that is a really touching thing about teaching for the OU. It's really lovely to be in a university where university degrees are so much valued by those who get them. Yeah, just the business of learning that we can do something can be immensely liberating, because it enables us to believe that there might be all sorts of other things that we can also do. And this is one of the reasons why I took up the piano, because I didn't think I could do it. And it turns out I'm not very good at it, but I can do it a bit. And even that is still a surprise to me. Now, on the robots question, do robots have free will, is the essence of Nick's question, I guess. And I think I can't see any reason why, if I define free will as this matter of having the ability to do otherwise, I don't see why you shouldn't say that they haven't got free will in that sense. And we could certainly blame a robot because it chooses to do one thing when it should have chosen to do another, and when it should have been obvious to the robot itself that it should have chosen otherwise, but it had the ability to do otherwise, and off it went and deployed it in the wrong way. Of course, what we do with a robot when we discover that, because we don't think that robots are people in the sense that we are, or at least I don't, we reprogram the robot. We say, well, the settings must be wrong. We can't have it doing that. Let's reprogram it a bit and get it to do this instead in that kind of situation. Once again, I'm going to say roughly the same as I said about animals, non-human animals. I'm going to say it doesn't bother me in the slightest that in this way, the kind of free will that we have turns out to be more or less continuous with a kind of free will that we can imagine automata having. That's fine by me, because I want the picture to be smooth continuity everywhere. And I want the picture also, that perhaps goes back to what we were saying about God, I want the picture to be one which is, as people like to say, a naturalistic picture, meaning that there shouldn't be anything in it which is in obvious and violent conflict with science. And I don't believe there is. In particular, I don't think, I'm willing to fight all comers on the matter of causation. I don't think there's anything about being a scientist that commits you to thinking that all causation is irresistible necessity, which can only go one way, and there can't be any other possible states of the universe resulting from any antecedent state of the universe. I think that picture is just not very good science, and I think it's superseded science, and I think it's time philosophers got past it too. Hello, Nick. You've got two people asking you questions. One of them is Paul, and one of them is Terry.
Can you hear me now? Ah, marvellous. Hello, Sophie. I look a little bit different because all the hair has gone, as you've probably noticed here. I know you've written extensively about epiphanies, so I'd like to know how you feel about how do epiphanies fit into the idea of free will, as we are subjected to or can be compelled to believe new knowledge, information and wisdom in a sublime way. So can being overawed restrict free will? That's my question.
Could I just answer? Okay. Thank you, Paul. Lovely to see you again. Like the haircut. This business of restricting free will, all the time in everything we do, we operate against conditions and we operate against background parameters. That's what action is like. Go back to the river metaphor. If you're swimming in a river, you're always wet. If you're swimming in a river, there's always water around you. Preferably not, unless you can breathe underwater, right over your head, but there's always water around you. And so with action, there are always conditions that you're acting in. Or take a different case, if you're playing cricket, there's always something going on. You're at the crease, you're being bowled at, there's always another ball about to come, unless you just got out. So with epiphanies, they're one of the things that can happen to human beings. They're one of the conditions that we can be subjected to. Do they compel us and thereby decrease our free will? Well, all sorts of things might be compulsory factors upon us. I mean, if you're in a river and you're a normal human being, then you're not at liberty to shoot straight out of the river 50 feet into the air like a rocket launcher. You just can't do that. Does that restrict our free will? No, because it restricts our absolute free will. It restricts our absolute choice, and we never had absolute choice in the first place. And that is something that I keep saying. Free will is a matter of degrees. Your liberty of choice is always limited by something, unless, and here I will mention God, unless you're God, there's always something limiting your liberty of choice. Perhaps even for God, there are things that limit his liberty of choice. But certainly for us, there are always conditions. And that's just fine, because we weren't looking for total freedom anyway, because total freedom's a chimera. Very explicit about what epiphanies are, but that's another big topic.
We're through to the end of our time.
I've got time to hear from Terry.
Can I just say, on behalf of everyone in the room, and hopefully you can hear us all, thank you very much for joining us and answering all our questions so enthusiastically and ably, as always.
Thank you, everyone.
We will pass back in a second in case you want to say anything to finish us off. But I just remind everyone that we have another talk coming up on the 11th of April. So that's 4 weeks' time. And we're going to be talking about how technologies could change our experiences and what impacts that might have on freedom and autonomy. And that will be with another good friend of the club who will be over from the University of Twente, which I forget how to pronounce each time, or something along those lines. That's Yasmin YJ Erden. So she'll be joining us, we hope in person, if nothing goes wrong, to talk about that. So you can book on the OSO website. It's osoarts.org.uk/philosophy club. If you've been kind enough to make a donation, come and see me and I will give you a copy of our book, What Counts as Philosophy, which has a contribution from Yasmin and from Sophie-Grace. Sophie-Grace, we'll hand back to you, but thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. It was brilliant, really brilliant.
Thanks, everyone. Couldn't have done it without you. Bye.
Bye.